EU leaders this week will discuss energy prices and resilience across the European Union. One of the ways that they can actually improve resilience across the European Union is to improve digitisation of the EU economy. And to do that, they need to change what meets the definition of high-speed broadband at EU Commission level. Today, the threshold that has to be reached for high-speed broadband under EU state aid rules is just 30 megabits per second. This will leave thousands of homes across this country with copper wire broadband connections, while most rural homes will have direct fibre connections, just like their city cousins. But people who live within 1 kilometre of the Green Air Cabinet will have just 30 megabits per second in hundreds of villages across this country will be left with a copper wire connection, even though they don't have one, but actually 2 fibre cables running outside their door. To address this, the EU needs to change its definition of high-speed broadband under EU state aid rules. The EU digital agenda did set an ambition in relation to broadband of having universal speeds of 30 megabits per second. But today, under the EU Digital Compass, the ambition is to have universal access to gigabit broadband by 2030. Now, Ireland is well positioned to be the leading EU member state with regard to that, and to have gigabit connectivity available on a universal basis across this country by the second half of this decade. But people will be left behind by this outdated definition, and it is imperative that the Taoiseach uses his influence with the Commission to ensure that this outdated definition does not leave people behind here in this country and elsewhere around Europe. The second issue I want to focus on is in the issue of energy. And I'm asking the government to do something really radical, and that is think in the long term here in Ireland. It's in our interests, it's in the EU interests, particularly when it comes to energy security, to think long term here in Ireland. And we've heard colleagues here talking about the situation on the Ukrainian border. We have Russian troops massing at the Ukrainian border, and yet we have the Russians turning down the tap when it comes to gas coming into the European Union. And over the medium term, Ireland will have 60,000 megawatts of renewable electricity generated off our west coast, which is surplus to our requirements here. And we need to start planning now for a new Atlantic electricity interconnector running from the west coast of Ireland directly into the European electricity grid. Now, last week, Dáil Éireann unanimously passed a motion which called for, among other things, the government to immediately design a strategy in conjunction with the European Commission to fund and construct an Atlantic electricity interconnector that would land west and southwest coast renewable electricity directly into the mainland European electricity grid. Now, this can provide huge quantities of clean electricity to the European Union, create tens of thousands of jobs right along the western seaboard, bringing about balanced regional development, and significantly reduce the cost of electricity to Irish homes, making it the cheapest electricity in Europe. But to do that, we need to establish an offshore renewable development authority, which would actually drive the type of change that is needed, the strategic thinking that is needed in this country. And in tandem with that, the government needs to directly engage at EU Council level, pushing for the need for the Commission itself to spearhead the development of an Atlantic coast electricity interconnector, bringing that clean, green, Irish-generated electricity right into the heart of Europe. And it's imperative that we lead from the front with regard to this particular objective. And I'll ask the Taoiseach later this week, when he meets with Olaf Scholz, the new German Chancellor, to put to him that Ireland can actually help Germany in terms of meeting its long-term sustainable energy objectives. And Germany has a huge challenge to meet its renewable energy objectives up to 2040. It's hoping to take all of its gas-fired or coal-fired electricity generation out of its system by 2040. And to do that, it will require importing a substantial amount of green energy. And Ireland can help provide that by having that interconnection from the west coast of Ireland directly into the European electricity grid. And this is not just to meet the renewable energy targets that are set right across Europe, but it's to deal with those geopolitical challenges that we're now seeing amassing on the Ukrainian border today. Because, as we know, the Russian-owned Gazprom, the world's largest producer of gas, typically supplies a third of the needs of gas to countries across the European Union. But this November, the flows dwindled to a 6-year low. So it's all right, the EU talking tough, but it's very difficult to talk tough when the Russians are turning down the tap in relation to gas. And not only do we need to focus on electricity being transported into the European grid, we also need to look at hydrogen from the west coast of Ireland being manufactured there, being transported to many other EU member states. But to do that, Ireland, which is one of the very few EU countries without a green hydrogen strategy, needs to expedite that immediately. Garamagat.